Raging expeditions and brutal conquering of the Vikings are legendary. Their aggression and pillage of lands they came ashore have stayed the annals of time. History states the Vikings were among the very first to set foot on the continent of North America. Welcome to Bizarre History. Today we will look into what life would be like now if the Vikings stayed in North America. The question of what if the Vikings had stayed in North America raises some stark observations to many. For a start, the technological advantages that Vikings held over the Native Americans. The Viking Age followed the Iron Age and Roman culture. In short, they had steel and the indigenous North American population did not. Between steel and sail, on paper the Vikings could have stayed and colonized North America. Nothing was stopping them. It just didn't happen. Yet we can see, observing the settlement the Vikings made, it was not as simple as which culture was more advanced. Several complications stood in their way. A glaring impracticality stood in the way of the Vikings staying in North America. They were attempting to colonize from a newly found colony. Let's not forget that Greenland, founded by Erik the Red, was a new and only 1,000 or so populated settlement for the Vikings. Greenland itself was subject to important trade from Iceland and Norway. As this story shows us, journeying from Norway to Greenland or Iceland to Greenland is no easy feat. Newfoundland only became an idea to the Vikings from having boats and men lost to the seas around it. For a settlement of Vikings to take hold over time, they needed vital supplies that could not be acquired from their colonies of Iceland and Greenland. They would have needed raw materials like iron for construction and tools, let alone weapons. To make this reality harsher, there was a lack of resources for them to plunder and make a worthwhile colony. Trade with Europe relied on valuable items like silver and gold, neither of which the Vikings found on their expeditions. Colonies needed to be profitable. For this to be a reality, it would have meant setting up a robust trade system with the natives. It would also have taken some integration from the Vikings, and judging from how their first attempts went, this was probably asking a little much. The story of the Viking explorers reaching North America is a part of their Northern Hemisphere travails. Off the back of their remarkable journey to Greenland, North America was stumbled upon by the Vikings. This initial expedition to Greenland was not simple for these masters of the seas. Despite superior navigating and seafaring prowess, a Viking expansion to Greenland was a dangerous journey that cost many lives. Life and death costs were probably part and parcel of the adventuring lifestyle, but only 14 of the 25 Viking boats sent to settle in Greenland survived the journey. However, they did survive, and they did make settlements. Trade routes were discovered, and this trade was between Norway and Iceland to the newly acquired Greenland. While traveling the harsh conditions of these northernmost seas, land further west was sighted by accident. A merchant by the name of Bjarni Holfsson was taken off course by the weather conditions when he saw that there was more land to find further west. Reporting this back to Leif Erikson, he and his father Erik the Red soon made arrangements to go and explore this land. They did so in around 15 years following. In the recorded history of Vikings, it's clear that creating settlements and colonizing was no simple matter, even for a party as fluent at doing so as the Vikings. The Saga of Erik the Red details a group of around 160 people in 2 ships from Greenland who made the initial journey. Despite aiming for Vineland, the Viking settlers ended up elsewhere, approximately modern-day Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, Canada. They had initial success in grazing and raising grapes and other natural resources, like wheat, for their starting settlements. Yet in irony to trump all ironies, the Vikings were caught off guard by the severity of the winter they found themselves in. The conditions drove some settlers to madness, and an instance of a whale washing ashore only to sicken the camp from its meat left the settlement endangered. It is written they took the whale's carcass and threw it off a cliff as an offering to the gods. Then the settlers found themselves at the turn of spring, where the weather and the sustenance got much easier. These Greenlanders did run short of food, however. Their stay was none the easier, and they were yet to encounter the native inhabitants of this new world. While the majority of settlers were to gather and head south in search of Vineland and its potential harvest of grapes, other settlers attempted sailing north. This had a grave consequence. The small group of settlers intending north had their boats blown to Ireland across the Atlantic, where they were beaten and subjected to slavery. The first sighting of indigenous North Americans happened in the summer. The settlers traveling north to Vineland discovered the opening of a river into the sea as the seasons were getting lighter and brighter. Their travels led them to a rich and abundant country. Everything the settlers needed immediately was accounted for. The fishing was plentiful, animals roamed the land, and grapes and wheat could be found easily. Settling for good, colonizing this land must have seemed within the easy grasp of the Vikings. To add to their good luck, it did not even snow the following winter. Yet the first sighting of Native Americans to the Vikings was the arrival of boats covered in skins and pelts of animals. They waved sticks in the air to produce sounds alike that of threshing. In response, the Viking settlers displayed a shield in all white to signal a gesture of peace. A particular Viking terminology is used for the native Inuit and Thule populations found in Greenland and Canada. The term skringaling is found consistently in the writings of these explorations. The early encounters with the skringalings were successful for the Vikings, and this start of peace seemed to be confirmed. All accounts point to trade occurring between the natives encountered in Vineland with the Viking settlers who arrived there. The sides are believed to have bartered and exchanged skins and pelts in exchange for cloth and milk. The Vikings who arrived on North American shores did not arrive with murderous intent and were not greeted with it either. However, this was not to last. Returning to trade once more skringalings came to trade with the Vikings at their settlement. In the writings, it's believed that a bull of the settlers' livestock frightened the natives from trading. They retreated to their boats and sailed away. The Vikings believed this had changed the exchange from a friendly trade to an open conflict. 3 days later, the skringalings came in greater numbers and fired a form of ballista at the Vikings, causing them to battle. After a retreat to an encampment the Vikings could defend, they defeated the native attackers to the cost of some of their men. It was this turn of fate that a 3.5-year expedition had reached what would become its home stretch. The leader of this expedition, Bjornfinn Karlsefni, could see the risk and reward in the venture. He declared that despite everything such a vast expanse could offer, anything gained stood to be under constant threat from the inhabitants. The Viking explorers soon returned to Greenland and Iceland, having created the longest-lasting colony until Columbus and the Europeans some 5 centuries later. Theoretically, a successful Viking colony could have started. Had a settlement of some caliber survived in Newfoundland with several thousand people, history states that subsistence farmers of settlements stand to breed at a remarkable rate. If they had not had such trouble with the native population, they could stand to have doubled their 1,000 in just 20 to 30 years. Say the Vikings stay for around a century. Then without the threat of native attack, they could multiply between 8 to 32 times in numbers. An organized and heavily resourced Viking colony, left undisturbed to flourish and grow, stood to overwhelm the natives with their technology and iron. All circumstances favoring the Vikings, they could have spread throughout the land and settled all over North America. All things going to their way, Vikings could have been the ones exploring South America with their form of conquistadors. Viking America, with a successful integration, build of colonies, technologies, and persons, would have been powerful. It would have been more powerful than any other empire rivaling at the time. Maintaining a transatlantic colony was not an easy task some 500 years later. The success would have been world-changing. Harder to envision is a world more Norse-centric in its culture and customs. Ironically, some have touted a Viking America built to the level of empires could have made its own colonization trips to the British Isles and Scandinavia. If you want to hear more alternate history and what might have been, subscribe and ring that notification bell. Thanks for watching Bizarre History. See you next time.